thank you all for braving that terrible weather out there and coming in. Great program today, really is, and thank you again for being here. I'm Stan Morris, current president of the Society, so on behalf of the board of managers and directors of this program. We're not going to have any administrative remarks. We're just going to get right into the program. And since this, yes,
Can I
Jenny?
say something before you get into
Yes, you may. Of course, you may.
Someone asked me last month if I would look up some information on the Pugsleys, which I did, but I can't remember who it was. Anyone here tonight asked you on the Pugsley family?
About the Pugsley family, P-U-G-S-L-E-Y. Pugsley family. Anybody there remember that? Jenny, we didn't draw anything. Okay, thank you. All right, let's move right in. Great program this evening, a local program, feeling local personalities, local people, that's great. I'd like to introduce Fanny Manzi, who's been a major coordinator of tonight's events. And Fanny, if you join me up in front, please. And my understanding is that you may introduce to the audience. And Fanny's here to give us an idea of who from the Italian community. Hopefully, Fanny.
Right here in the front row here. Lori Bartel. Lori Bartel. Rosemary Seppi Nielsen. Victor Seppi. And his son Wayne Seppi. And let's see, Joseph Magnarella. And Gino and Ginny Iannucci. Well, by marriage. Bill Nanzi and Irene Safari Wing. And that's all of the Italian heritage that I know of that are here. So,
Give us a few minutes, we'll multiply.
yeah. Okay.
That's very good. Okay, thank you very much, Fanny.
Thank you, Fanny.
Appreciate that. Okay. It's my pleasure and privilege to introduce now our Town of Washington historian, who also is our Village of Millbrook historian. Personality known to all, longtime resident of this community, and I don't think anybody has done, with the exception perhaps of Ginny Augustin, of doing more for history in our community than David Greenwood. So David, would you?
Thank you for those kind words, but it's not true. It really isn't true. My fascination is getting to know all of you and hearing your stories, because you're the history. My family is originally from England, and when my wife and I went back to England to be married 40 years ago, we went to the small community that my family had come from in the West Riding of Yorkshire. And at the time that happened, we were welcomed with open arms. That's because of the fact that I had come from that community. Well, if we go from Heptonstall, which is my community in Britain, to Fundy or Etri, or any of the areas that your families came from, it's the same thing. Your history, your family story, is what has been brought to make Millbrook what it is today. And I'm so pleased to be able to help coordinate some of the projects that we're involved with. Do I pretend to know all of your history? No. But I have to tell you two things, and that is, you are part of history. When we look at the photographs that you see up here, some of them are quite old. Some of them are over 100 years old. And we make the mistake of thinking, that's history. But if I take a picture of what you did at Thanksgiving, you're going to say, that's not history, that just happened. But in a twinkling of an eye, it can change. And the Historical Society's project is to help document and record our history, those things that you've done. where you went to school, your friends, the clubs you were part of. And here's an example of something that, depending on your age, was just yesterday, or it could have been ancient history. But from an archive point of view, it's such an extraordinary document. Now, this is a photograph, okay, and I'm going to give you a clue. How many of you remember or know about the 1937 hot dog roast? Okay? Skip, tell them what this is all about.
Go ahead.
Stand up, come on.
Vic knows a little bit. I think Vic's in the photo.
I'm in there, yeah.
Whoa, bingo! Just yesterday.
I'm in there. I'm the only guy there with a shirt and tie and a jacket on, right there.
Oh my
Whoa!
They say going to a party, I dressed up.
Whoa, that's fabulous. Tell us about the picture.
Well, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well,
This is both of you.
his uncle, Pat Safari, who was a tremendous golfer, and he was probably the only member in Millbrook at the time that was able to play golf up here at the Millbrook Golf Club, because that was a rich man's club. And Pat was a caddy, but he was so well respected that they gave him a membership. And he played, of course, he won the championships all the time. Nobody could beat him. And he always used to have a big party at the end of the season, big hot dog roast, and all the caddies, everybody, all his friends were invited. And that's a picture.
And so this is documenting such an important part of our local history. And tell us something about it from your point of view, and all the golf course and what it meant, and all these caddies.
Well, I think if you look at it close and you look at all the names in there, I think there's 44 people in there, and 42 of them are Italian.
So, our history.
So that's Italian heritage. And
Yeah.
what have you,
And that's it. So the first impression when you think, oh, the golf course, that has nothing to do with us. Guess what? Bingo! Here we are.
He's in the picture also.
Whoa!
Gino Nucci.
Gino.
Right?
Oh, sure.
Gino and his two brothers.
So we'll pass this around. But that's the kind of thing that in an archive is so important. Because that's something that is so easily lost, or thrown out, or forgotten about. And with it, we lose the story. So one of our projects is to document your stories so that you can share them. And we're very fortunate because we've got Bill Jackson. Bill, come on up here. Some of you know Bill. Bill has the advantage of youth and enthusiasm.
Thank you very much.
And tell them what your project is.
All right. Hi, everyone. A lot of you don't know who I am. I'm Bill Jackson. Worked down in the bank for a couple of years. But I've been in this community since I was about 4 years old. Started off on the Ham Estate, and now I'm over on Oak Summit Road. Been a part of this community, like I said, my whole life. And to be a part of the Historical Society here is just something I've always wanted to do. Not only have I lived in this community, but I've been a student of history for a while. This book, very important to me, written by our own Ginny Argerson and Jean Armstrong here. These are the writings of Louise Tompkins. When I was about 12 years old, 13 years old, Kathy Paytay started a historical group called the Yorker Club. And we would regularly go and visit Louise at the infirmary, right down the road from where I live now. And we'd listen to her, and she'd talk, and we'd see her stories, and it moved me so much that Louise and all her disabilities and everything she had, she knew what David was saying. We've got to document these little things. We've got to document these day-to-day things. That's where I come in. I joined the Historical Society with one of my major projects. I'm the secretary now, but one of my major projects I came in with was what's called the Oral History Program. Oral history, when people talk about oral history, they think, oh, that's the president's speeches. That's Richard Nixon's tape in his desk, that he taped everything. That's oral history. No, that's not oral history. Oral history is the conversations that happen down at the diner. The oral history is the hot dog parties in 1937. It's what happens in the post office, in the deli, and Stewart's. That's oral history, sitting there, talking to the community, talking to you guys, getting your stories and archiving these stories. Because these stories are what make this community so great. So that's the program I'm involved with now. So on your way, at the end of the meeting, you'll see over on the table there a bunch of flyers that have my email address on there. If you have any stories, any family stories, Italian, any heritage, email me. I want to get that story on videotape. I want to get the storyteller on videotape. I want them archived and kept in our, for everyone, for future generations. For my son, who's now 3.5, when hopefully in 14 or 15 years when he's into history, he'll pull up what we did. He'll pull up these documents. So please, the oral history program, very important. We're going to get all of you on videotape. We're going to get all your stories on videotape. And it's going to make this society even better. So that's my initial program. That's what I came here to do. So that's the oral history. But tonight we're talking about the Italian heritage. We're talking about you guys. We're talking about the stories. Back to Louise, because I am a student of hers. I like to read a little bit, not much, of an article she had written in 1979 called The Italian Contribution. I think she really nails it home in a couple of these parts, so I wanted to just read one or two sections really quickly. Let me get to the right page here. Speaking of that, my place mark was for the bank, and on the bank, Ron Mosca. He's another Italian family in here, so just a connection there. Those early immigrants, reading right from Louise Tompkins' words, those early immigrants went through a great deal of suffering, self-denial, and opposition in putting down roots in a new land. Their hard work and determination in making their dreams of a new life come true is amazing, an American epic. Their courage in going to a new land where they did not understand the language cannot be measured and has rarely been surpassed. Like pioneers who moved west on the American frontier, there was much communal spirit and a helping of one another, both in settling in and in getting over some of life's bumpier roads. The Italian families that came first helped the ones that came later to learn English and obtain homes of their own. Amazing, amazing. A community that traveled thousands of miles to come here, helping each other, bringing them in. That's incredible. Real quick, one other part I wanted to share. As with most other immigrant groups, the sons and daughters of these people have gone on to receive more and more education and have moved into many professions, some here in the Millbrook area, others not. Their story is a realization of the dreams that their grandparents and great-grandparents had when they set forth into the unknown of a strange new land, Italian pioneers in search of America. That's what you guys are. That's what you are, Italian pioneers in search of America. One of the first pioneers, Vincent Seppi Sr. and his family were among the first to come around 1900. Seppi acted as an interpreter for Italians who followed. He was also the first Italian to take part in the politics of Millbrook. The Italian heritage right there, starting off. So that's where I like to start. I want this to be a very relaxed tonight. We're going to videotape it. This is actually going to be an installment in our oral history program, because that's what this is right here. It's a big group of oral history. We're going to get all your stories. We're going to record them. But it's a nice, relaxing atmosphere. Nothing stressful, just talking about the stories that made our community great.
And let me just throw one thing in, and that is 1979 and Louise Tompkins and what she did. We all know Louise, and what an inspiration she was. On a weekly basis, she would, old copies of the Millbrook Roundtable would come, and she'd look through, and she'd pull out in a year, like 1923, and look for what happened in 1923, and document some of the stories with the Italian community. And that's what evolved into her first paper on the Italian community. She did it in 1979, 1980. And the notes that were taken were on index cards. Now, most of us are of an age, and if I hold up my index cards, they're a little bigger than she used, because I need to see them, so the larger they are, the easier. But this has become obsolete. You ask a child today about taking notes, and they go, what? Well, this inventory of my notes, of Louise's notes, of Carmine D'Arpino's notes, are invaluable because it writes down documents and puts them together. It's a wonderful resource. But let me get back to Louise. So 1979, the notes were transcribed of what she spoke about on a reel-to-reel tape. That's another thing that's obsolete. But it was written down. Then Carmine D'Arpino took the notes. And Carmine, being Carmine, wrote on them in red pen, "Where did this come from?" Question mark. You know, where did she get this? And she must have been talking to Fanny. She must have been talking to Fanny. So all the way through, Carmine is saying, she must have been talking to Fanny. But there's no last name. And here's a question for you. Was there a Fanny that you know of who worked at the infirmary that would have taken time to talk to Louise? And this is over several years. Anyone have any memory of a Fanny?
Well, it could be a Fanny Sorrentino, which was Fanny Safari.
Oh,
Could have been. She
Because-
just passed away a year or two ago. She was 100 years old.
okay. Because what Carmine knew, when he wrote Fanny, he knew who it was, but here we are 35 years later, and which Fanny is it? And the reason that's so important, a lot of the information that she had on the Italian families had to come from somewhere, because that wasn't in the newspapers, a lot of that. And Fanny was the resource for a lot of the information in those names. So we'll track down more about her, because that could have been who it is. But that's the joy of local history, tracking down those sources and details. And with that, Bill, you have a series of questions, so why don't you start it off?
Yeah.
And let's see what happens.
Well, my questions are more just to sort of get people talking, sort of just introductory stuff. Now, I started off with the Seppis because from my reading, said your family was the first one in the Seppi family, is that correct?
Yeah, well, one thing I would like to mention is this.
Yes.
My grandfather actually came here in 1893.
Wow.
Ellis Island had opened, I believe, in the fall of 1892.
Okay.
And my grandfather came in May 19th, actually, of 1893, with a group of other men from Italy, who all lived together in a boarding house that was owned by Dora Safari's parents.
Wow.
Dora Safari Alongo's parents.
And was this over by
in the alley.
Dietrich's?
Up in
in
Baldwin
Valley.
Place.
Ah, right, and that was in the 1890s?
Yeah, in the 1890s, and I found a census sheet and has the names of all of those gentlemen who came over and apparently had secured employment prior to coming here, because otherwise it'd been crazy not to. But they all were craftsmen and artisans and gardeners and farmers and so on, and they found work, and that's where they stayed, and they stayed together. That was their first place of residence. After that, they moved to another location, also in Alden Place.
How many families, I've heard Hogan's Alley mentioned before, how many Italian families were in Hogan's Alley?
All of them. A lot.
Every
And
single one.
I was so jealous of all of them, because we didn't live there. We lived on Front Street.
Well, no.
Well, you
I
guys did,
lived
I wasn't
there.
born
I was
yet.
born, I was made up there. I was
You're
born
much
in
older
Gibson.
than I.
So I lived on Alden Place, yeah. And we moved down to Front Street because family got so big we had to move out of the house, okay?
I need a little more room.
We needed more room. But I was born up on Alden Place. And actually, as all the kids that you saw in that picture, we never left that street. We mostly stayed there. We played there. First time I got to come downtown was like a big deal for me. And I snuck away to go downtown because we didn't leave the street.
See, and that's a great story because I can relate to that story going to elementary school right up on Alden Place. We would sneak down into the village, well, not in elementary school, but more in high school. So that's a connection. I like that. All the Italian families lived in Hogan's Alley. Why?
I don't really know. I probably couldn't get any place else at the
Okay,
time.
all right.
Things were kind of tough in those days.
Tell me how.
Well, you couldn't buy property if you were in Italian.
In Millbrook, or in
In
general in the whole country? In Millbrook.
You know, things were, there was a lot of discrimination in those days.
Okay.
And it was tough for those people. So that was probably the only place they could buy property.
All right. I see.
And that's where they made their homes.
Now,
One question, I just want to make sure. In looking at the census, it was your grandfather who came in 1893?
Yes.
And what was his first name?
Dominic,
Dominic.
Domenico.
Okay. Domenico Seppi?
Yes.
Okay. Because I've got that information, but they misspelled the name. And one of the problems that we have with the census is, and imagine this for a moment, you have an American census taker walking from house to house, speaking in English, talking to someone who speaks only in Italian, trying to write the names down of the individuals without the foggiest clue how to spell an Italian name. So in looking through that handwritten, the names are crazy to pick up. And sometimes it happens. We have an example of someone whose last name was Papa. That wasn't the last name at all. He was the head of the family, Papa. Okay. And then underneath it were the other names, but the person writing it down didn't know the difference. So one of the things that we're doing is working with confirming the names and how they were spelled. Something else happens, and that is the name might be Luigi, and when you go to the yearbooks or the books in the high school, it's Louis. And which name are we using in it? So that's part of the project that we have. And the last one, and Skip can appreciate this, how many times the same name was used in the family? So is it grandfather, son, grandson, cousin? Which one is it? And try to figure out which Safari, which Seppi, which Giacomo are we using? And Rotondo.
Yeah,
David,
fancies.
David, along that line,
Yeah.
when my father was born, his name was Joseph. So whoever asked my grandfather what they wanted, what the name was going to be, he told him, this is how I've been told by my aunt, but he said Joe's, which to him was Joseph, But, so what they put on the birth certificate was J-O-S-E. Instead of Joseph, it's, I guess, Jose.
And those are the joys of names and families and tradition we're working on. Yes?
One more point I'd like to make about the coming over, the migration, the diaspora, so to speak. Very often the men came first and left the women and the children behind until they could provide for their transportation and secure a place for them to live. And I know that that was the case with my grandfather. He came in 1893, and I don't believe that my grandmother and my father and his siblings, I don't believe they came until 1901, actually. So, but my grandfather had gone home in the interim because there was somebody else born at that time.
And let me just add one thing to it, sorry. And that is, in 1900, these were all boarders, and they were living at the Safari house. So the Safari is listed as H, meaning head, and the names were Pasquale Barasucali, Ernesto Paracella, Salvatore Molella, Angelo Ruggiero, Seppi, Gianmetti de Polori, Erino Iorino, Tommaso Revalaga, and again, this is sort of sounding out. they were all at the Safari House. And in some of the houses, there were as many as 17 people who were boarders in the houses, single men, and their ages were 34, 21, 22, 18, 50. Those are the ages of the boarders in 1900 at the Safari House.
I'm fascinated about the Safari House because I think it's a unit of American history that no longer exists. It's almost not just what ethnic group you are, but the construct of multi-ages living. I mean, the Quakers have it, Quaker housing, but it's the most healthy way for unattached people to live together. And I'd like to know the history. I mean, was it an Italian family that started it? And how long did it last?
Well, we've got the Italian community here. Can anyone answer that question about
I
the
just
Safari
told
House?
Skip that I think that his grandfather, the elder Rodrigo, I think he may have been the first Italian. I'm not sure about that. I really have to go back and check the resources, but I noticed at one time going through, I think it was the records from Ellis Island, that he had come over very early. And I'll have to check on that, but he may have been the first one to initiate
I
that.
had a video of him too.
Of Rodrigo Safari?
Yeah, I've got a lot of videos, but I've got a lot of Skip's family. Rodrigo was, remember that video I showed of you that you were in when you were a young man? I'm sure he was in there. I'm sure that was your grandfather that was there.
And the names for those Safari names, there was Adolfo, Camilla, Rodrigo, and they came from Monticelli. Those were the names. And the date that's listed on this, you can't read. So it's looking at it, it's 18 something because it's so small. So to say exactly, I don't have that. But they were all listed at the same time.
Okay, I've got an oral history of my uncle gave, said 1897. Well, it's anybody's guess, but if she's got documentation.
Yeah, and there's so many that 1890, 1893, 1897, 1899, 1900, 1900, 1900, 19, and then the next one's 1910, 1910, 1910 with the census. And the other, we have Rodrigo, the wedding announcement, Josephine Nardone.
Yeah, he got married here.
Yep,
Josephine
September
Nardone.
19, September 1909.
Fifino, yes.
That's
right.
That's his grandma.
My
That's your
grandmother.
grandmother.
Okay, 1909, that was listed, that was really important.
Right.
And then the other names that we've blocked down, there's a wedding announcement, Patrick, Mary, Ann Sherman.
That's
With two
the
sons.
Pat you talked about, that gave the hot dog roast.
Okay,
And that'd be right after World War II.
okay. But, so that's the kind of information we're gathering, we're putting in. So as you find things, help us to fill them out so that the next generation will have cards like this, if not something else, to keep track of the names. That's great.
All right. We have communities moving in now into Hogan's Alley. We have people families moving in there. Any other families that were in Hogan's Alley as well?
Excuse me, I don't know where Hogan's Alley.
All the places.
All the
Place up by the
The elementary school.
Yeah, drive in that area. Now, let's
That was a
position-
dead-end street in our day.
Yeah, I remember when the high
For
school
years
was
it was
as well.
called the alley, because Alden Place, probably many people couldn't even say Alden Place. So, grabbed onto something that was similar to the alley, and then it became Hogan's
Hogan's
Alley
Alley.
for some reason that I don't know. I mean, there was some other
Must have been a
place.
Hogan that lived
There was a
there somewhere.
Hogan's Alley
It's
somewhere.
It's a south side.
Somebody knows.
Yes, there was a very early Mary Hogan who lived there, and I
Okay.
think she had owned more than her own house. She had quite a bit of influence at the very beginning. We have that someplace in our archives.
And what was unique about her is that remember I mentioned H for head? She was listed as H, head. And there weren't many women who were listed as heads. And living with her was her son at the time of those early houses. And she bought 3 of them at the end. So the name came from the combination of Mrs. Hogan and also a comic strip, which was very popular in the 1890s called Hogan's Alley. And it was a feature that specialized in a lot of immigrants living on the same street and all the foods and how they interacted and talked. So that's one of the reasons that she lived on the street, but gave rise, oh, she's Hogan, that's Hogan's Alley.
Is the building still there?
As far as I know,
That
it's all.
particular house?
Yes.
I think it is. There is a house there. If it's the same one that they were living in at the time of this, the time these men came over, I'm not really sure, but that's the only house that I can relate it to. It's the only house I've known in my lifetime.
So now, there was more than one house in Hogan's Alley, right? There was
Oh,
more than
yeah.
houses, of course, of course. Did anyone else, any other families come from Hogan's Alley? Anyone stay there, any memories? Yes,
My
yes.
dad was born,
Well, your dad is,
Honorado Bartolomucci.
he was born in
He was
Hogan's
born
Alley.
there, and his siblings were born there.
How many siblings?
Three more, four.
Three more, four more.
Four in the family.
3 more. How many,
Five in Joe.
it must have been incredible in Hogan's Alley, just the liveliness, the children, the houses, the communal spirit. Can anyone share any stories of growing up in Hogan's Alley, of what you guys did?
My
as
mother was
little
born in
kids?
Hogan's Alley.
My father's sister.
Sister.
Yeah, I was born there.
We used to play up there when we were kids all the time.
Yeah. What type of games? Give me an
Well,
example.
we played stickball down the end of it, where the Massarellis lived. Have you, remember Dolly?
Yeah,
Dolly would play with us,
yeah.
and,
How many kids we're talking about? Give me a rough
oh,
idea.
there's a lot of kids.
Lot of kids.
Lots of kids.
Yeah.
Is there any coincidence that's why there's school there now? Was maybe?
No, that was
tied
entirely
together, all the
different.
kids?
That happened in the '60s.
Yeah, so,
That place, I was so jealous of them. You know, of course, he lived there, he was born up there, but by the time I came along, they were already down in the other house. And these kids, on a summer's night, you would go up there and everybody would be out there either playing stickball or hide and seek. It was a big thing. Yeah, that was really big.
Uh-huh.
It's like I said, we never left the street. We played there, we lived there, we played there, we did everything on that street. And at nighttime, it was like, everybody got together, used to tell stories. My brother used to tell ghost stories on it.
I like
No
that.
television back then, so that would make a lot of
They
sense.
said under a light, on a fence, they tell
Under a
ghost stories,
lamppost, you know.
then we were afraid to go home.
Oh, sure. I can understand that. I
And
totally
then in the
get it.
wintertime, there was used to be something that belonged to the Grange organization, I believe, but it was once a church also. We used to call it the Church Hill. The building is still there. I don't know what it's used for now. But that hill, to my way of thinking, or at least in my memory, it was a heck of a lot higher than it is now, but we
Just a
still
sleigh ride
sleigh
down
ride
there, like we
now.
thought that was a big mountain though.
Yeah.
Again, just to localize this is where the high school hill is, that hill going up there?
No,
or
just before you make the left to go into Alden Place,
Okay.
on the right-hand side is a
Yep.
big building.
Yeah,
And that is the building, and in front of that was a hill.
That was the village hall for a long
Oh,
time.
was
wasn't
it?
it?
And it started off as a Methodist church that became
Church,
the village hall, became apartments
Right.
and all. And one of the things that we inherited was a map from 1928. And that map basically listed all of the buildings and what they were made of. Now, it's called a Sanborn map. And the Sanborn map, for people in insurance, if they looked at it to determine what the insurance rate would be, was it made out of wood? Was it made out of stone? Was it made out of brick? Was it made out of metal? Was there fire in it, or was it a stable? And that kind of information helped to determine what the tax was, insurance rate was. Well, it turns out, 1928, the Whalen family had that Sanborn map from 1928 with all the houses. Now, these were very common. They were in booklet forms. You get them in every community. But at some point at the bank, someone went through and wrote down a lot of the Italian names who were living in 1928 at them. And I was able to make a photocopy of it. But these are the names from Giacomo, and that's the stone building at the end. That's wonderful. Across the street, there were 3 houses, all Fiori. Then moving down to Mazzarone and Cardinale,
Right?
Mm-hmm.
and then DeFazio, and DeFazio had 4 buildings, including the clubhouse. Across the street from that was Manzi,
Right.
and then next to that was Sciarra,
Sure.
Shara, okay. And then moving on, the next ones that were listed, Martini,
Martini's across the street, yeah.
and then next to that was Giuseppe,
Yeah, right.
And across from that was the Willis family. And we've got wonderful photos of the Willis family. Great story, I'll tell you that one later.
Yes.
Henrietta could speak fluent Italian.
And
Yes.
Henrietta with the Italian. We've got those great stories on that. Then at the very end of the block, we had Malali
Malawi.
on one side and Penosa
Panazzo.
on the other. And that was a bakery, a shop.
She had a little
Like a little
store.
deli type place.
Same kind as Patron had down here.
Okay.
Same kind as
The great,
Nancy's also had
sister
one.
and
Manzy's.
Irene,
Nancy's had one too.
Okay.
grandmother.
the grape shade.
Mandy's had a little store up there also.
Okay. So those, unfortunately, those are the only names. Oh, and then 2 down from that was the ferry along Church Street.
Yes,
But-
Well, we
Almerindo.
Yeah.
My family
Henry.
also lived in Malala place, Malala.
Okay, okay.
We were next door to the Willises,
Oh, okay.
yeah, between
Oh.
Shars and Willis.
Okay. So, but that's the kind of document, finding out where people lived and so on. And just a fluke, someone in 1928 in pencil wrote those in. I have no idea why, but here we are years later, and George said, do you want to make a photocopy of that? Yes, yes, we're going to make a photocopy. So we're using that as
Which,
a...
by the way, in banking these days, highly illegal. Can't do that. It's a bad thing to do with that. It's called redlining, where you loan money out to people. But in the back, you had something you wanted to add.
I've been on Hogan's Alley now for 20 years. We actually live in the Malellis house. And one of the things that I'd like to mention about it, and those of you who travel, it's very interesting. On my particular lot, there were 3 houses, one in the front and one in the back. So many of those lots were layered, and you can see as you go up towards the high school, there's several houses on one, almost like a little extra village community. And I think that's very unique to the village as a whole, the way that was set up there. And we absolutely love being on the alley, and we love that fact that we could be in one of the stone houses that were created by the Italians. And it really is a great place to raise a family and to be into the whole.
When was that house built?
Around 1900 is what we've been able to see. And there was a bakery there. There was a cutout window where the baked goods were sold. And Fanny, I think, was born there, right, Fanny?
Yes, I was.
Right.
All right.
That was owned by my uncle, who was a baker. And he had a bakery there.
Do you know your uncle's name? Do you remember?
He was in Nardone, Justo Nardone.
Okay.
And then he moved to New Jersey, and
Story about.
my father bought the house. My father was working for Thorne, and they were living on the Thorne estate. And then he bought that house. And it was a stone house in the middle, and a house in the back on the hill that was, wood. And the one in the front was also wood. The one in the front was a 3-story apartment house, and the one in the back was 2-story apartment.
What year was this? Do you recall what year that was?
What year that
you were in there? That you were.
I'm not gonna tell you.
Okay, good.
My family was there, but I was the last one of my family, but,
Okay.
some of my family was born down in Thorndale. And, the last 2 of us were born at Alden Place.
Actually, I lived in an apartment in the front house that was on the street. The first, when I first got married, I lived there in an apartment. And that was in 1947.
In the house that,
Yeah.
and so there were apartments in this house, yeah?
Yeah.
Do you, I don't know if you said, what was the original family that built that house? Do you,
I think my uncle had it built.
your uncle did, okay.
Justo Nardone.
Yep, okay.
I think my
But I don't know
grandfather
if he
did the
had-
stonework for him.
Pardon?
My grandfather did all the masonry for
Yeah, I
Juice.
imagine he did.
Juice was his brother-in-law.
Yeah, right. The 2, I don't know, he had all 3 of the houses built, the one in the back of that. That one burned down in probably 53, 54, the one in the back. Was an electrical problem, because they were fixing it to have new tenants. And the one in the front we had torn down
Yeah, that got
in
torn down.
74, 75, I think.
Jill, it's also interesting to think about as a community grows,
Yeah.
and because as mayor, I'm obsessed with water and sewer. Picture each one of these lots needing an outhouse. There were shared outhouses and wells. So my property has 3 wells on it right now, and then the whole area, a lot of us still use that for other watering. But as David has spoken quite often about the Lyle report, and when our village fathers and mothers decided in the 30s that it was very important to put in infrastructure, water and sewer, that helped that whole area there for well contamination and all of that. But that's how everybody lived, sharing from the spigot and using the outhouse at night. I don't think my house had a bathroom until the 30s, maybe?
That situation
When I
prompted the
came,
Lyle
we
report,
had a bathroom.
because of the septics and the wells being so close and pollution and so forth, and then Lyle came with a report in 1913, was it, David? Yeah.
And that's when the municipal water came in and.
No, that came later on, like Laura just said, it came in the
Much
30s.
30s.
31.
Much
I
later.
can remember when they were putting the water and sewer in on that street, and I was a kid, I was a boy when living on that street when they were putting it in.
In the
You
30s.
know, I was born in 25, so it was right after that.
Right after that. Just to move things, when did Italian families start leaving Hogan Valley? When did the Italian community?
World War II.
World War II. What about World War II caused the families to move out? What about it?
Well, it was just, we were of that age that we were either drafted or enlisted to fight the war, and after World War II, that things just changed, that's all.
Yeah.
But a lot of the families stayed on Alden Place, and it was the children that married and moved away or moved off. But
Oh, gotcha. So
some
the
of
first
them-
generation
some of
stayed
them are
in
still
Hogan.
there.
Okay. First generation stayed in Hogan's Valley,
Yeah.
where the second and third generation
Right.
started moving out and getting educations and moving up. Fantastic. This second and third generations, did they do the same thing that their fathers did, as their grandfathers did?
No.
Did they move on to different things, or did they stay with them? And
In my family, my two older brothers went to college, and the rest of the family worked to send those two to college. And they, the girls worked and the boys too. They didn't all graduate from high school either, some of them. But the older ones definitely did.
Talking about, you're talking about Hogan's Alley and what have you, but I know my grandfather and his brother, they built a house down on County House Road in what you call Black Brook, back in 1901.
All right, well, stop you real quick. I know County House Road, but I don't know Black Brook.
That's
Tell me
called Black Brook,
Why?
because it was a black neighborhood
Okay.
at the time.
Okay.
I believe, David, correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that was it.
And I can only think the only reason that they built there is probably the only place they could buy a piece of land at the time. And they built a house, a wood frame house. They did the foundations in good weather. Then, of course, when it got cold, there was no work for masonry. They framed it up in the wintertime and what have you. And they lived there for 4 or 5 years, and then they sold it to Mr. Collins. And then, meanwhile, they had built another place in the village on Church Street. And that's where they lived, on Church Street. They didn't live on Hogan Valley. And they lived there, and then my grandfather's brother went back to Italy in 1908. And my grandfather, I guess, started courting Josephine Nardone and got married in 1909, and that's where they lived. And all the kids were born there. They moved out of there in 1927 and over to Front Street. Sadie was 3 years old when they
They
moved.
had nine children.
9 kids.
Oh, where?
He said Josephine Nardone, and my mother was a Nardone, and they were related.
They were. Just changing some. Oh, Corinne.
Where, again, I don't know where the black community was.
County House Road is just by the monument, outside of town on 343.
Oh, by the county
343.
infirmary or the.
Yeah, the county.
Infirmary, yeah.
Yep. Oak
Near
Summit
the, near
Road.
the, near the greenhouse,
Yeah.
Greenbrier?
No,
Just behind it.
You gotta
That's
take
Old
the,
82, you take
Right.
Old 82, then you
Yeah.
veer off to the left, and that will run you right into the.
Right
Okay,
behind Greenbrier.
okay.
you go down to where the old county home
Okay.
and infirmary was. It leads right to it. And it's in that area there.
Well, you had said in the wintertime, not much work for stonemasons. What social clubs? Were there social gatherings? Were there social organizations at that time that
They
were a part of?
they formed a society in 1913, 1912, thereabouts.
All right.
They called it first the Sons of Caserta, and the sons of Benito Mussolini, and it was a mutual aid society.
All right.
And her father, Dick's father, was the secretary. I think it was the recording secretary.
And how long
And
was this?
he had to be a young man then.
And Vinnie Seppi's the one who documented all three of
Whole
those
thing.
in
That's the great thing.
1933. He wrote the article and what they did and had it set up. It's really
I
special.
brought that with me if you want me to read it.
Yeah.
I'll read it.
And we'll excerpt that in just a minute. But that's the kind of documentation that is so important for it.
Right.
And there were two other things. Forgive me for jumping
Oh,
in
no,
on
no,
it.
please.
But in looking through it with the research, here are two other connections. On July 22nd, 1928, Miss Anna Safari is to marry James DeFazio. And it's listed in the round table. Then in 1934, Mrs. Josephine Fiore is to marry Alexander Safari. And then Carmine noted Amarindo. So there you go, Alexander
We call him
Amarindo.
just Al.
We call them
Al, so what the name was. So that's the kind of document we put it together. And here's one, and I want to ask, how many of you were members of Boy Scout Troop 2?
32.
Troop 2. No one?
Before our time. Or
Okay.
maybe,
This, okay,
I'm
1926.
old, I'm not that old.
Okay, this is 1926 in the round table. At a meeting held at the Italian Society Club Rooms in Millbrook Thursday Eve, a Boy Scout troop was organized by the Italian boys to be known as Troop Number 2, Boy Scouts of America. Talks on scouting by George Abercrombie, Scout Executive for Dutchess County, were given. And Henry Wicker was the Millbrook Scoutmaster for Troop 1.
yeah, all the guys used to talk about this.
Okay, now here are the officers as of 1926. Raymond Evangelista, Scoutmaster. Ralph
He was Scoutmaster.
Scaro, Assistant Scoutmaster.
Char?
Then the Lions Patrol, okay, because you've got ages. In the Lions Patrol, Dominique Parazzolo
Paracella.
was the patrol leader. Florindo Palucci
Yeah,
was the assistant patrol leader.
we Freddie.
Vincent Paracella, Tivamo Magiacomo,
Taviano.
Ottaviano, okay.
Ottaviano.
Benedetto Steppi, Joseph Ariti, John Manzi Jr., Alexander Sarucci, and Bartolomucci. They were the members of that level. Then the younger ones, called the Tiger Patrol, was P. Magdarella, patrol leader, John Ariti, assistant leader, L. Savaccio.
Slovakia,
That's the name to Galli. That's
Okay.
Galli. Yeah. He was a blacksmith.
Okay, A. Palucci, J. Safari, R. Benza,
Raymond Benz.
okay, Augie Benza, J. Martino,
John
Martini, R. Safari, Benedetto Seppi was Scout Cribe, so, and Benedetto,
Benedetto, yes.
and was that, well,
That's another Seppi
That's
family.
another
Okay.
Seppi family, yeah.
okay, he was the
Oh,
Scout
that's the
Scribe.
That's the Lord, yeah.
And Vicendo Paracella was the treasurer. And the very next week, they were to be tested on tying knots. So that's 1926, that was established with those names.
Very good.
So we had no scouts, no younger scouts in any of those troops? All right, how about this? I'm gonna say something, maybe I'll get a little more response from this. Not familiar with it myself, so I wanna ask about it. What is this Feast of Saint Rocco? Please speak up about it. All I know is it took place in the first 2 weeks of August. It still does to this day. It takes place in the first 2 weeks of August. But I heard the Feast of St. Rocco in Millbrook was quite a to-do. Anybody? Anything you want to add to?
I remember it very vaguely as people talking about it, mentioning that that was what it was, but I don't recall any hoopla
I
associated
can
with it.
remember there was a Rocco Giacomo, we used to have fireworks, used to raise, put fireworks on it, up at all in place at that time. And that was about that time, it might have been that even, he would make his own fireworks and fire them on.
Wow, make his own fireworks, that's awesome. That'd be neat.
Yeah, that was a big time, all the time, family San Ron. I mean, I don't know, but I remember them telling me about it. Such a, you know.
It's still a huge celebration in Italy.
Yeah.
And everywhere, not in just Fondi, but everywhere. And I was in Fondi this past summer for the Feast of St. Rocco. And so it's a huge procession that just goes all through the streets of Fondi. And it's interesting, I never knew what his claim to fame was, but apparently there was some major pestilence during his time. And he just helped greatly with his community. And then he got ill. And so rumor has it, or story has it, that he took himself into a cave somewhere because he didn't want to infect anyone else. And a dog would come every day with this little round roll of bread and bring it to him. And that supposedly kept him alive. And so before the procession starts in Fondi, well actually early that morning, all the bakeries make the little round bread with a cross in the middle of it, and they wrap it in just like paper, brown paper. And people in the community buy it, and they hand it out to their friends and family that day.
Does anyone remember anything similar to that during the Feast of St. Rocco?
There's a big statue of St. Rocco in the Catholic Church. If you go in to the right of the main altar.
Right.
Second.
There's also, there's
When
a
we
huge statue in
refurbished it,
Fondi outside of one of the piazzas.
That leads me to my next question. Again, churches and worship, the first and second generation, what was it like coming to America? And from my research says Catholicism is very popular in the Italian communities. What was it like coming to America and worshiping here for the first time? Any stories along those lines? Nothing? Just asking, that's why I got these questions here.
So do the Italians build St. Joseph's?
That's a great question.
I don't know.
Answer that?
And Sue, where's Sue?
Sue Fargio?
She left?
Yeah.
Okay, because she's done a lot of work with us on that project with Museum in the Streets, and has researched how the church actually was established. And it started off as a mission of both Armenia and Poughkeepsie, and the priest would come. The earliest communicants for it were the Irish community that had been here, and by 1871, the property was negotiated for the church to be actually built. So 1871 is the first.
This is one of the first.
And it's been in existence. And depending on the source you read, it ends up being the oldest church in the village of Millbrook. And the reason for that is it's been continuously used. It hasn't shifted anywhere else. So that basis is the oldest church in the village of Millbrook. So that's part of the history, and Sue's been doing a lot of work researching
Didn't that
it.
church come from someplace else
No.
on wheels, or, I thought I read something that it came out of somewhere else, like Amelia or somewhere else, and they brought it down here and because of a fire or something.
No, that was built on the location. Some of the other buildings that were there were moved around. And the original owner of the site was a blacksmith. And some of the buildings got moved around to accommodate the church, but it was built in 1871.
Wow.
Don't forget to mention, these guys, they used to play up on Diedrich's Pond during the winter time. They'd have bonfires up there, they used to skate, have big old parties.
Well, tell me about that on
Well, he
Detroit.
was,
Right
he
on.
used to watch his car up there in the stream.
Well, in those days, all the villages used to come up, at wintertime, ice skating was very popular, and Diedrich Lake was one of the places, and also the wing pond, up in the wing pond, we used to ice skate up there. And in those days, nobody worried about trespassers, you know. We were allowed to go on, nobody said anything. And when it would freeze, we used to have cold winters, and we'd have ice all winter long. We would go up and shovel the snow off, we'd have hockey games, or we'd have bonfires at night, cook hot dogs, marshmallows. But it would be a community thing. Everybody would come out. Young, old, everybody.
And tell them the story about you washing your car.
Oh, no.
Oh, that was funny, I think you really should. They didn't have car washes then, so they had to have a place to wash their car.
No car washes,
And their brakes were made of asbestos. And
we were
it
driving.
worked because when they got wet, they didn't work.
yeah, sure, so.
We
Go ahead, tell 'em.
drive a car into the stream there, right
Below the dam.
below the dam up, and we wash our car in there, and
By the sewage?
just below the dam on, off of
44.
Yeah, oh, okay.
There was no guardrail there.
There was a road in there, we used to drive in
Oh,
there.
wow, just drive right into there, and
Yeah.
wash the car down there.
Right
Wow.
below
The water would be maybe a foot deep, and we would just drive in and wash our car.
Wash it.
And your brakes would get wet when you come out, you would have no brakes.
You got Any cars stuck down there? No, everyone got out of there, huh? All right, Christmas. It's, we just went through Christmas. What was Christmas like, say, on Hogan's Alley? What was Christmas like in your homes here in Millbrook, in the Italian community? What were they like? Anybody?
Lots of food.
Lots of food, lots of family, I'm sure.
Christmas Eve was especially, you know, we always had the fish dinner. Many different kinds of fish and, you know, families all together.
So all the families would come together, it would be individualized in each house, but everyone
Children,
would.
grandchildren.
Very nice.
It was a bigger celebration of Christmas Eve for Italian-American families than Christmas Day.
You know, I married into an Italian family, and it's the same today. They celebrate Christmas Eve, it's a lot bigger than their Christmas Day celebrations. Any other stories about Christmas?
They always had 7 different fish dishes.
Fish was the majority.
Christmas Eve, yeah.
That was my next question, was about food. Tell me about the food. Did the food change? Did it stay like, did you see the food changing, what you ate when your families came to America? Did you bring the cuisine from Italy over? They did. Tell me what types of foods would be cooked in the houses.
Well, at Christmas, it would be lobster, shrimp.
Lobster, where are they getting this from?
Well, they was a special time of year, you didn't have this all the time.
I was gonna say, they couldn't go down to the.
And it would be, especially Christmas Eve, that was the big feast. Okay?
Mhm.
It would be mostly fish dinner, because those times, at Christmas time, you didn't eat meat, you ate fish. Okay?
Yeah.
And the meals were tremendous. You sat down, you were there for hours.
I can imagine. Any other stories? Any other?
My mother always made her own bread. They didn't buy bread in those days.
No, it was all
I
made.
remember when the day that was for bread making day, we always had fried dough for lunch.
And they made struffoli. Don't forget the struffoli.
Strufoli, what's strufoli?
Struffoli is made from a sweet yeast dough, and you roll it out and into like a little tiny roll, and you cut it up into little pieces as small as your fingernail, and you deep fry it. And while you're doing this, the darn dough that you have put aside is growing and growing. It seems to get bigger and bigger and bigger the more you work with it. But anyway, you deep fry these little tiny pieces of sweet dough, and then to like little golden nuggets, and then you dip it in like a honey, and you just keep piling these on a plate. And then you put nonpareils and little silver things on it, and pinnolis, and it's just a great time. But it's a Christmas.
Yes, her former name was Mary Messina.
Messina. Well, I'm sorry. Oh,
You
sorry.
might find it informative to inquire about home production of wine.
Oh, yes, that was my next question. On the food lines is the wine. Wine was, you made your wine. You made it.
Everybody made their own wine.
Did you grow the grapes, or did you go somewhere and get the grapes?
They'd buy,
By the case.
from Highland, they would bring a truck over, and they would split the load maybe. They had a grinder they used to pass from house to house.
Yeah.
They used the same grinder, they would take turns. And, yeah, they all made their own wine.
Oh, I'm sure it's delicious too.
And for years afterwards, even though they had stopped making wine many, many years before, when you would go back into that cellar or that basement, there'd still be that lingering fragrance of the wine. It never left.
How about limoncello?
I'm not familiar, what is that?
Sorrento.
It's a drink.
It's a drink that everybody makes in Italy.
Oh, okay.
More of a soda.
Was that enjoyed here, limoncello? Anyone remember lemon?
I remember it, I had it just a couple of days ago.
Oh,
Because John Carlos is in the audience, makes it from scratch, and whenever we're at the house, we will have it, it's really important. Here's another thing, how many of you ever visited the yacht club? Does that ring a bell?
What's yacht club?
Here's a hint, Manzi. Here's a second hint, Deneen Road.
Oh, down there.
John Manzi, here's a photograph of it, opened a hotel on Deneen.
Deneen, right. Where's the
And
money?
basically, they sold wine and other things. So it was the hotel that the Manzi family had. And their first bartender was Mr. Nardone. And here's Mr. Nardone with the men out in front, and they've all got a glass of something. And the joke was, I'll pass this around because you may recognize
Which
some of
Nardone?
this.
Which
And
Nardone?
the original Mr. Nardone. If you look
Carmine?
at the-
Carmine?
Carmine?
That would have been Carmine.
That's my
That's our uncle.
Okay, and they called it the Yacht Club, and it was their joke, John Manzi Jr. told me, because it looked out at the pond.
Okay.
So they came outside and there's the water, so that was their yacht club. And John shared that picture with me, and we're hoping now that we can find the original to do a much better
That
copy
building's
for it.
still there.
But the building's still there.
Oh, already.
So, and the question at the time was 1927, 1928, 1929, and it lasted through the 30s. And,
Yeah, my mother got married there. My mother and father, they called it the Black Swan.
okay, that was probably the
That was in
official name.
1938.
Okay, so even through Prohibition, it continued, but at that point it was referred to as the restaurant for it. But they were very, John Manzi told me how everyone really enjoyed sharing the wines that they were making. So that was it. But no one ever got drunk there, he said. No one ever got drunk there. You drink too much, you're out of here. But that's the kind of story that's under the radar that's so important for us to be able to document now. So if you recognize any of the faces on that, please let me know. Yes?
I was gonna say, we all had our own grape arbors. All the families had their own grape arbors, and, you know, my mother made jelly from them and stuff. Big trees, we all had big trees too.
Well, we've been talking for a little about an hour now.
One more sober point about coming to America, a lot of diversity. The first American soldier from Millbrook killed in World War I was an immigrant from Italy. I regret to say I don't believe he left any descendants here. I believe his wife was in Italy at the time of his death.
Well, and I bet you his name is up
Yeah.
up in the park, on the plaque there. But
No, it's all.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, that was.
Didn't know that, thank you, that's an interesting point.
That was
You
Jim's
don't know
son,
the name?
Jerry Pinoza.
That was,
Wow.
tell me more
He
about
was
it,
a-
tell me, Gino, what was his name?
Was that Molly's husband?
No,
But she was
no,
widowed.
I think it was her brother-in-law.
Her brother-in-law?
Fascinating. That brings us into, we a little over an hour. We've been talking, we could do this all night, this is like awesome, I love this so much. I guess one of my final questions are, did your families ever go back to Fondi? Did any of your families
Yeah,
ever
I've
go?
been back.
You went back,
A couple of times.
went back.
Noreen's been there a while.
Noreen lives there 6 months out of the year.
In the towns, the other towns. What you'll see is we have a map, Before you guys go tonight, I would love for us to just jot down the towns that we're from. I know we're from Fondy, and we have a lot from Fondy, but I want to know the other villages that make up, other Italian villages that help make up Millbrook as well.
Just a couple of things that I would like to say.
Sure.
Little known facts about Fondy.
Mhm.
Fondy first received its provisional citizenship from Rome in 188 BC.
Wow.
That was about the time of the Punic Wars, Hannibal, etc. Okay? The other thing is that the Appian Way, which goes from Rome down to Brindisi, which is on the eastern coast of the Adriatic, goes right through the town of Fondy. The Via Appia goes right through.
Fundy is about exactly halfway between Rome and
Right.
mile-wise.
And it was a great resort area for the early Romans. In fact, when I was doing some of the genealogy, it was interesting to see how many of the newborn Italian babies were given the Roman names like Flavia and Apollonia and all of these very Roman names. So the Roman influence was very strong there.
According to mythology, Hercules found Fondi.
Well, the church that, where my father, I'm sure, was baptized, the Church of St. Peter's, that supposedly was built on the remains, the foundation of a shrine to Jupiter.
Wow, interesting.
So,
There still is a very large shrine to Jupiter, a temple of Jupiter in Terracina, which is just a town over from Fondi. And then there's a cave in Sperlonga, right on the beach, that was Tiberius's playground. He would go down to Sperlonga and party in this cave. It's still there. You can actually go there and can go in it.
when he wasn't playing with the babies, okay?
Sure. Our map, and also, go ahead.
Is there a large Italian community in Poughkeepsie?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's an Italian.
And then Milan or Milan up the
Milan.
are you all connected?
Great
I
question.
don't know anybody in Milan.
No.
I've done a lot of presentations in Poughkeepsie at the Italian Club, and a lot of those families trace their ancestors back to here, because remember all those individual young men who were boarders?
Yeah.
A lot of them, once they got married, ended up moving to Poughkeepsie with it, so there's a real correlation. And talking about trips back and forth, this is something that I uncovered. Some of you have heard this already. This is the Millbrook Roundtable, July 30th, 1953. 2 articles in it. Mr. Giuseppe Velletri of Fondi, Italy, arrived in New York last Thursday via Pan American Airways for a 3-month visit. Mr. Velletri is the brother of the late Joseph Velletri and is visiting with his sister-in-law, Mrs. Mary Velletri, and her sons. This is Mr. Velletri's first visit to the United States, and also the first time he has seen his younger brother, Rosario Velletri of Barnardsville in New Jersey, in 42 years. The second one, Mr. Silvio Rotuno of Fondi arrived in New York last Thursday via Pan American Airways for a 3-month visit with his brother, Alberto Rotuno, and family. It has been 50 years since Mr. Rotuno has been to the United States, and approximately 27 years since he last saw his brother. The last one? This is in 1953, really active. The Mrs. Mary and Mafalda Danieli left Idlewild Airport at 10 o'clock Sunday for a month-long visit back to Italy. That's 1953. And that's one of the things that makes this community so extraordinary, that the ties have gone on for the last 100+ years of family connecting with cousins and family members and going back and visits and
Mafalda
visiting.
brought back her husband.
Yes.
Right about that time.
Yeah.
Vincent.
And that's so unusual to have a 100-year continuity with a community, and those ties are still there. And for those of you who visit, those of you who you're virtually a citizen, aren't you? Hasn't that worked out?
Yes.
Congratulations on that. Just mention what you had to go through to get the citizen because of the
Oh my
name.
God, I tried it and I quit halfway through.
But this is so important.
Yeah,
I started out with her, but I got refused for one of the reasons, because the Italians, they don't like Wyndham.
Yeah. Well, no, actually, it was, yeah, they had a cutoff
They had a
year.
cutoff year.
If you had to go through your mom, but I was fortunate that I could go through to my dad. And my problem was, my name on my birth certificate said Bartel. It didn't say Bartolomucci. And then the spelling of the name was somehow along the way changed to Bartolomucci instead of Bartolomucci. So it was many years of trying to get it changed, and first I was told you can only change your name once on your birth certificate, but my dad's name was also wrong, and no, you can only change one thing. Anyway, it was a process, and after 10 years of on and off working at it, I finally was able to get everything changed and got my
Well,
citizenship.
congratulations, that's a wonderful, wonderful story.
Could I just say one
Sure.
thing before, because if I go home and don't say this, I'm not gonna sneak all of it.
Please.
I have done the entire genealogy for my family, going back to 1753, I think it was. And it's quite an interesting story as to how I got there, but I won't bore you with that right now. But if any of you are interested in doing your genealogy from Fundy, or anyone interested in doing their genealogy at all, you can call me and I can tell you about some of the resources that are available if you want to pursue that. But the Mormon Church in Poughkeepsie, the Church of Latter-day Saints, has a terrific family history library. And all of the microfilms from Fondi, Italy are still there. And those are the ones that I used originally to do the genealogy, and I went back there recently. I took someone else there recently. When I did that, that was like in 2004 and 5, and when I walked in and saw that they had not sent those microfilms back, I couldn't believe it. They're still there. I mean, it's a treasure trove of information for anyone who wants to pursue their family history. And they have everything, the birth certificates, the marriage certificates, the death certificates, the certificates about land transactions, purchases, and so on. So it's all there. If you want to see it, just come on up to me. I'll give you my phone number, and you can arrange to go over there sometime. They're very, very good people, very willing to help people with genealogy.
Wonderful. Bill?
All right, this has been awesome this evening. I really appreciate everyone coming in and sharing their stories with us and all. I just want to say I want to read one last thing out of the Italian, the Italian Contribution by Louise Tompkins, real quick. By 1928, many Italians have made their dreams of owning their own business in Millbrook come true. Albert Rotundo had a contracting business. Raymond DeFazio owned a bakery. Louis Velletri a tailor shop. Velletri and Rea ran a men's clothing store. Gerald Sotero had a barber shop, as did John Castaldi and A. Benza. O. Giacomo ran a lunchroom. Louis Savaccio had a blacksmith shop. Louis Carazone had a tailor shop. Gus Arturi owned a shoemaker shop, and his son, Ralph Arturi, became a pharmacist and operated a drugstore. Operated a drugstore in Millbrook for many years. The Italian community built Millbrook. They started this town, and I believe today it is our heart of the village of Millbrook. It really is. And I appreciate all of you coming together and sharing your stories with me. I just want to do one last reminder, reiterate. Over on the table, we have all of our Italian families' last names written on those sheets of paper. Before you all go tonight, I would really love you to go over there and write your name underneath the family name that you belong to. I want to document you guys. I want to write them all down and figure out what families were which, and where everyone came from.
Could I say something before you get done? I'd like to thank the Historical Society for all the work they've done on our Italian heritage, and especially David Greenwood and what he's done over the years, and also with this Museum of the Street thing. I think it's a great tribute to the Italian community. And it's going to be a great thing with David, and Barbara Pierce has been like a bulldog with it. I mean, and it's going to be a nice thing. We're hoping we get it done before October. We have everything in place.
And that is our April program as well as the Museum of the Street.
You asked before about different Italian organizations, and David has a copy of this too, but I brought something with me.
Please.
And it has to do with their father. And I think it's appropriate. Because what it does, it tells you how hard they work to be citizens and so on and so forth.
Oh, God.
You know, and this, of course, David found this here, and Gail found it again for me and copied it for me. And when they, page here. In 1931, I believe, Vincent Seppi wrote an explanation of all the organizations that were formed, the society. But prior to that, it was formed in 1913, I believe, and there's an article in the newspaper, and it says a new society. It says the New Italian Mutual Aid Society held a meeting on March 30th. Upon payment of an initiation fee of $1, 50 charter members were admitted to the society. Also, it was decided to hold the membership open until April 5th, 1913. The following officers were elected for the coming year. A. Parisi was president. A. Safari, vice president. Vincent Seppi, recording secretary. R. Safari, financial secretary. G. Nardone, treasurer. R. Ballone, L. Lucia, and G. Castaldi, curators. C. C. Mitchell.
There's a good Italian name.
D. Seppi and G. Seppi. O. Magiacomo, G. Sotero, and R. Raymond DeFazio, directors. And see, you talked about Papa before. He still carried that name. S. Papa and G. Cipollero, marshals of the hall.
Okay.
And this was in 13, and they even went as far to incorporate this thing. On May 16, 1913, they incorporated it for some reason or another. And so it was made originally then, and then their dad was secretary then in 1912, 13, and in 1931 he still was.
So it wasn't bad.
And he wrote an article that was, David, I don't know where it came from, but also the poem and all. I want to read that poem.
Please do.
Okay? But he gives an explanation of it. If you don't mind, I'll just read it quick as I can. The social and fraternal activities of the Italians in Millbrook are centered in 3 organizations: the Society Sons of Caserta, Society Benito Mussolini, and the Italian Club. The first 2 named are welfare solidarities, their sole purpose being to provide financial and medical assistance for their respective members in case of sickness or death. While the latter was founded not only to cultivate the social side of local Italians, but to promote a movement for Americanization and good citizenship. The value and importance of an organization of this type, not only to the Italian colony, but to the community in general, is obvious when the following information is thoroughly digested. Members who fall ill or are victims of accidents receive for 3 months sick benefits of $1 per day and necessary medical service outside of surgical operations without cost. For the next 3 months, the financial compensation is reduced to 50 cents per day and free medical service. If the duration of sickness goes beyond that period, a final cash settlement is made and the case closed. In the event of death, the society pays all funeral expenses and assesses each member a mortuary tax of $1. The sum collected is given to the widow or the nearest relative of the deceased. Quite intricate, all this here, you know. For organizations that are limited in membership and scope, the foregoing benefits doubtless seem extreme when it is considered that the premium is only $1 per month. In 31, it went to $1, was 50 cents back in 1912. Nevertheless, that so far, every just claim has been paid. The Italian Club is a boon to the members of the colony, especially those who have no families, for besides offering the usual recreational facilities of club life, its paramount objective is to foster naturalization. In fact, no one may become a member unless he has filed his declaration of intention, the so-called first papers to become an American citizen. Once this has been done, the new member is given a thorough course of instruction in civics to facilitate his passing the test given by the federal examiners to all prospective citizens. The club can feel a special pride in the fact that it has directly aided many local Italians to achieve American citizenship. It can be as successful in coordinating the divergent viewpoints of its members and weld them into a political unit. There is no reason why they cannot attain the place they are entitled to in the community. And this was written by their father, Rosemary. And now he also wrote a poem, and the poem is it's as if it was written today about Millbrook.
But I have to tell you, I was so astonished when I read this in my adulthood. I had seen it as a child, but didn't realize that my father, who had an 8th grade education, had written this poem in the sonnet form. Where did he learn that? I mean, how did he know that? But it's a beautiful poem. So.
You want to read it?
Oh, sure. Any opportunity to show up. Nestling among the hills, calm and serene, Millbrook gives her grace its full display. Impatient hounds reveal the fox at bay, while hunters ride through endless fields of green. Proud and stately mansions dot the scene, and Bennett's School enacts the classic play. Here nature ruled that beauty hold full sway, placing on her head the crown of queen. O beauty lovers, pause and feast your eyes, for here God placed a bit of paradise.
Isn't that great? I'd like to thank the Historical Society, David, and everybody to support this museum in the streets too. I like all the support that's come so far. And, David and Barbara have worked very, very hard on the whole thing.
And that presentation will be coming up in April, and Barbara will be showing you what's happened. And as of today, all of the written text, all of the photographs, all of the details are at the printers. So, and Laura signed it off. So thank you, Laura, for that. This is Laura's involvement very much.
And then we have an ongoing thing that Barbara is pursuing, and Laura, and what have you, to try to make Millbrook and Fundy sister cities in some way or another. And they're working on that, so it may come to be also.
How did the first Italians know of Millbrook? Is there a family that's here that said, come to Millbrook, or employed them before they...
If you hear the Fury family, it's because of the Seppis. And
No, but I mean, not Italian, pre-Italian.
that was Frank.
Yeah, as I understand it, a fellow, an architect by the name of Ware, who designed made the plans up for Bennett College, wanted to involve stonework, and he knew about the people in Fundy who were great stonemasons and so forth, and artists as well. They were more than stonemasons, they were artists as well, these guys. And he brought some of them over. As I understand it, I could be wrong.
You know, Mead and Taft were the contractors, and supposedly Mead and Taft brought a lot of laborers over there.
And
They would tell you more on that.
this is a great segue into something I want you to see. And tell us about it.
That was done by John Giovanni was his real name, Magnarella. And he did a fireplace for one of the estates, carving those tiles. And the wife of the woman that owned the estate sent this one tile down to his wife to show her what her husband was doing.
And it survived. The craftsmanship's wonderful.
Yes, as I indicated, these people were more than stonemasons. There were a lot of them were frustrated artists, sculptors. As a matter of fact, if you look at the former Rotuno house, the stone house across from the Federated Church, on the corner, okay, you will look between the windows. Very few people recognize this, but I do because of a story that I ran into as a child. There is a rondelle. A rondelle is just an arrangement of stones placed, and probably the guy did it on his own without even asking the owner, because he was a frustrated artist. He had to put a little design in there. Between the top two windows is a rondelle. Not very many people recognize it, but if you look closer, you'll see it. But these guys were artists, and I'll tell you another little story about the Italian. We're not from here. My parents were from Italy, but from another place. But anyway, I remember they were putting stucco on a house, And the foreman, as I was just a child, I remember the foreman telling this man to mix up another batch of stucco. And I guess he mixed up a tremendously large batch because the foreman was giving him heck for doing too much. All he had was just a couple of feet. So you know what he did with the rest of the stucco? He made a bushel, a basket with roses in it, formed out of stucco. Just, it's not, these guys were artists more than stonemasons.
Wonderful. And Bernadette, you had a question? Ask it again.
I think your name is Miss Giuseppe. You said your brother told ghost stories. What was the name of your brother, please?
No, I didn't hear what you said.
What the brother's name
Who
that
told the ghost story?
told the ghost stories?
His name was Vincent
Vincent Jr.
Jr.
Okay, and Mr. Safari, you said your grandfather's brother returned to Italy?
Yes, he did.
And what was his name and what year was that?
Adolfo,
And what year?
1908.
Thank you.
Can you tell she's an archivist for the Historical Society? Thank you, Bernadette.
May I
That's
make
great.
another comment?
Sure.
You mentioned about scouting, okay? Scouting is a very important issue in this community. Jim Safari, his uncle, was scoutmaster. Jim Safari was noted in the Hudson Valley and beyond in the scouting organization. Number one, he was the scoutmaster that was invited more to the West Point camporees than any other scoutmaster. Number two, he had the rights to camp and travel and hike across any estate in the county virtually. That was his reputation. And number three, he had the only high record of 4 Eagle Scouts at one time. Believe me. He's very, very
I remember
famous
him
scout.
in the early.
3 of them were his sons.
Started
3
scouting.
of them were his sons.
Yeah, right. I remember, I used to camp with him, but the truth of the matter is that one time he had 4.
Oh, yeah.
And one of them was my son.
Oh, yours. He had more than 4 during his whole...
Yeah, but this was at one time.
At one time.
At one time, he had 4 scouts, Eagle Scouts.
His nickname was Jungle
We
Jim.
call him Jungle Jim.
Jungle Jim, yes, as a matter of fact.
Jim was great with the kids and with the scouts and what have you. He was just great. When I was a kid, he was my uncle, but he was the scoutmaster, and we learned a lot. It was pretty good. He was.
My first year in Scouts in the very early 80s, I remember Mr. Safari. Very older man at that point, very old. He retired shortly after that, but amazing some of the things we do. So, see, the Italian community reaches out to everyone in Millbrook, anyone who's lived and grown up in this village. The Italian community has influenced everyone, and that's why I thought it'd be important that a month or so before the Museum in the Streets hit, that we have this get-together and this gathering. Basically, my reason is just to thank you guys. Thank you for making the town that I grew up in one of the most beautiful and one of the best places in America to grow up in. So thank you guys very much. And David,
So once again, refreshments, help yourself, and do put your names near the family names on the list. We're going to be keeping those. Thank you again.
get my
And
email
look at the
address
images.
so I can get your story.